Kia ora. Hello. Welcome to the very first podcast in the Between the Lines series where we will shine a light on dyslexia. My name is Mike Stiles and I will be talking today with Emeritus Professor Dr. David Mellor. Over the years, dyslexia has had a deficit image associated with it, but it is much different to that in real life. There is nobody better to debunk any negative thoughts about dyslexia than Dr. David Mellor. David is a highly achieving academic, having lectured and researched in the area of animal physiology, and more recently he has been a world leader in the area of animal ethics and animal welfare. And, most importantly, he has dyslexia. Since retiring from his university work, David has written many books, including many volumes of poetry. David joins me now. Thank you, David, for being the first guest in this conversation series. Hello, David.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Kia ora to everyone who's listening and watching this. It's a real pleasure to be with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So, David, given that you grew up in a time when dyslexia officially wasn't a thing and was denied by anybody and everybody, tell us about your early years and how you got to discover your own dyslexia and how it played out for you initially.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Well, in fact, I was born in 1942, so I got to school at the age of 6, 1948. I had, unfortunately, recently deceased, but I had an identical twin brother, and we, of course, arrived at school at exactly the same time. After 4 years, I was 2 years behind him, which was a clear indication of learning difficulties. No one knew what dyslexia was in those days, and it was quite clear that I was struggling to learn. There were really quite serious negative consequences of that.
But your brother doesn't officially have dyslexia?
Well, that's interesting because a little bit later I'd like to talk about that. He certainly didn't have it as seriously as I did, but I think he had the benefits without the literacy difficulties. And I think actually my younger brother had some difficulties as well, although never recognized.
Oh, thank you for that. Have you been formally diagnosed, David, or is this just something that you actually know as opposed to a diagnosis?
Well, it's a bit hard to, when you drop 2 years behind your twin brother in 4 years at school, it's pretty clear that something's wrong. And the answer is formally no, but in terms of experience, as the years have unfolded, it became evident to me that I did have dyslexia. I was extremely lucky that my parents didn't sort of believe teachers and others that I was intellectually handicapped and so on, and they got me a tutor who was a retired primary school headmistress, as they were called in those days. Call them principals nowadays. And she didn't know what dyslexia was, but something about her empathy and approach was quite extraordinary. She was encouraging, thoughtful, imaginative, and flexible. And I had 3 years of 3 mornings a week of tutoring from her. Her name was Metty. And the main achievement she had was she convinced me that I could learn. It meant that I started to do better in restricted areas. Shortly after that, 1955, my younger brother and I spent a year on an uncle's farm in South Australia. And one of the things that is, I think, pretty important for many dyslexic people is that we learn best by doing rather than by reading, and by hearing rather than by reading. And I had a year on this uncle's farm learning by doing. 27. I did actually go to school, a sort of a country primary school, but learning by doing on the farm, following on from what Massey achieved in terms of giving me the confidence, was the beginning of change. I actually managed to get some C's in my grades at school, which were greatly celebrated as if they were A's.
It's true to say, David, that in New Zealand and most countries around the world, most people with dyslexia will not have been officially diagnosed. The financial hurdle is too big. I wonder whether you could relay anything more when you got back into a school situation. You could relay any more about how you got on in a school situation, you know, your relationship with your peers, for example, in a school setting.
Well, they all thought I was stupid, dumb, treated me badly. I was badly bullied, as is common the case. I was also very small. One of identical twins. We shared the placenta, and my twin brother had the lion's share. And I can tell you, I have a wonderful photograph of us when we were 8, sitting side by side, and I looked as if I was about 5 in terms of size. So I was small, I had glasses, I was regarded as stupid, and so I was a real target for my peers. The teachers, none of them were particularly assertively unpleasant. But they certainly had very low expectations of me and broadcast their thoughts on that to me and also to my parents. And the way I put it was that my Massey's help with me put me in a situation where I wasn't going to live down to their low expectations.
Well,
It put me on the path upward.
so were there parts of school that you really did enjoy, maybe more than others?
I enjoyed the sport in terms of hockey and gymnastics. I was in the hockey team, the senior hockey team, and we had went in state championships for gymnastics. One of the things that I really enjoyed in the year after coming back from the farm was the teacher there who really brought poetry alive. I can still see him actually turning a chair around so his foot was on the thing, but he was sort of over the back of it, holding a book of Banjo Patterson's poetry or C.J. Dennis, and just reciting them. And the way he did it, that sort of really engaged me. And there was a time I could recite the whole of the Man from Snowy River very easily, and many other poems. And what that shows is that if someone with dyslexia can be enthused about something, they get engaged by it, and that gives them increased confidence, and they can then tackle wider things. This teacher at the school, and then others following on in biology and in physics and chemistry, again with learning by doing laboratory classes, put me in a situation where my learning proved sufficiently for me to be able to go to the university.
So how did you get it? Because most people with dyslexia would say that the subject they hated most at school, be it primary or secondary, was either literacy or English. What were your feelings in that subject at secondary school level?
I did my best, really. I didn't see the point of doing English until I got to the university and had to start writing essays.
Of course, of course.
And essays that you might want to publish. I was passing and doing all right. I was very good at mathematics. I enjoyed the physics and chemistry. One of the things that we had in those days, the last 3 years of school in those days, now this is the late 50s, early 60s, was the third last was leaving. The second last was, intermediate was the third last, leaving, and then matriculation. And one of the things that was common, I was fortunate enough to be sent to a private school. One of the things that was common with students at that stage was if they were quite young, and I wasn't, I was a year, 2 years older than my contemporaries, was to go back for a second year matriculation. So I passed in the first year, and then I went back in the second year, and I thought, well, I'll just do physics, chemistry, and pure and applied maths. I don't need to worry about English, so I didn't worry about English. But boy, did I discover the well. I didn't worry about it then. I didn't actually worry about it later, but I had a huge amount of help from friends when it came to write things like towards the end of the university side, when I had to write a thesis and stuff like that. And boy, did I learn how much I had to still learn.
So you've just covered off two really interesting areas. One is the fact that many people with dyslexia have learnt the skill of using to good effect the assistance of others. But secondly, I did want to ask you about your spelling. And is spelling still a challenge for you or not? Because most people struggle with spelling.
Well, two anecdotes. One is the only thing in New Zealand, which I arrived in New Zealand in 1988. So first of all, I should say 24 years in Australia, 21 years in Scotland, and now 36 or so in New Zealand. And I arrived in 1988. The only thing I've ever had a tax deduction on was a book called Spelling.
Oh, that's very funny.
And the tax inspector was, what's this? And I said, well, by then I knew I was dyslexic. I said, well, I'm dyslexic. It just helps me. And she said, okay, well, that's all right. So, but what I always did when I was in front of new classes at the university, I was in a research institute in Scotland, and then I came out as professor of physiology and anatomy and head of a department at Massey University in 1988. The first session I had with any students was I'd write up on the board my name, contact details, and say, I am dyslexic. If I spell something incorrectly, correct it. Don't be shy about it. I'm very relaxed about this. And then I realized, and I've just realized this now, you remember I talked about the importance of teaching verbally. I used to write study guides for the students in my subjects and give each of them a study guide. And they were required to read the chapter relevant to the next session, not for memory, but just know where the different bits were. And the whole thing was question and answer. I would ask them questions, and it's safely, in a way that they felt relaxed and confident. So the whole point was to teach them to think physiologically or anatomically or in terms of ethics or in terms of animal welfare science, rather than learn by rote.
So one of the things that's come out of our discussion so far, David, is that you've owned your dyslexia by letting your students know that you are dyslexic is one of the best practices people talk about in terms of being successful with dyslexia, and that is owning it.
Yep.
And I think that's been a very, very useful way forward for you. And that's something I would recommend to anybody with dyslexia. But what I would like to do now is ask you about you and your brother, because there is research out there that says that it is possible for identical twins or twins to have pretty much similar genetic material, but one to be dyslexic and one not. I wonder whether you could expand on that a little.
Sure. Really only occurred to me relatively recently to think about my twin and features of his life and worldview. We didn't live in the same place after 1962 when I went up to New England University. We visited and so on, but we weren't actually living in the same place. I should preface these remarks by giving you a brief account of one of the huge advantages, phenomenal advantages of my dyslexia that I think other people have as well, but express in their own way. And that is, I've always been engaged by the big picture, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down a single line. It is whatever subject I'm doing, look as widely as I can. I draw very widely across academic disciplines or even in my own reading to draw together wide perspectives to give a new synthesis that gives freshness to the way we're thinking. And an example of that, well, I'll give you 3 examples. An example of that is that during my undergraduate degree, my bachelor's degree in physiology was taught one system at a time. The lungs, the heart and circulatory system, the brain, the gastrointestinal system, the urinary system, etc. And there were set chapters. What interested me was all of that put together so that the body could stay alive.
Right.
And what I did of my own accord during this was to draw a large mind map, if you like, or what's called a mind map, but basically it was a diagram with circles that had particular things written in them and arrows, and it was at least an A3 size. And what it did was to integrate at that stage. Now, this is the early 60s. At that stage, what we understood about the different systems, and that understanding integrated with the others so that I was able to talk about the whole thing. And during my honours year, I prepared that as a large chart, which later was published by Drug Houses of Australia as a teaching aid. And I only learned about 2.5 years ago that my department was distributed to all physiology departments in Australia. And I only learnt a couple of years ago that it was used very extensively by the physiology department I learnt from at New England University. So, big picture. The next area of my speciality was the physiology of the baby in the uterus interacting with its placenta, the uterus, the baby in the uterus, inside the mother, and the mother in her environment, rather than focusing on the kidneys of the fetus or something like that. So you can see this integrated side of things coming out there. And then the third and last example of about 30 that I can give over the 55 years of my post-PhD work is a thing called the 5 domains model for understanding animal welfare, where I brought together nutrition, the physical environment, the health of the animal, the way it is perceiving its external environment, and then finally the experiences that these animals will have as a result of all of those things. So you can see again, it is drawing widely. And that now, I mean, just as a matter of interest, that the latest paper that I wrote with colleagues on that was in 2020, and it was called the 2025 Domains Model. And whereas normally you would expect a scientific paper to, if you'd think you were doing pretty well if 200 people had read it or downloaded it. This one has been downloaded 91,000 times. And so that tells you is that the freshness of that approach engaged others and diverted thinking away from what had preceded it. Now, I just mention that in those terms because I really want to sheet home the great gifts of dyslexia. And one of them is this capacity and desire to look broadly and to widely synthesize and to engage with much bigger perspectives than many people do.
Thank you, David. You've actually highlighted a key characteristic of the dyslexic mind is that ability to see the big picture and to think in terms of the big picture. Thank you for raising that. I'm wondering whether there are any other benefits that you see, whether you could elaborate some other benefits that you see about your dyslexia.
Well, yeah, I think apart from anything else, empathy for others who have the same experience, an understanding of the necessity to strive. I mean, one thing about what I've just said is you don't actually have a choice. I didn't choose to see the world this way. It's in the wiring in my brain, and I am internally impelled to think of it this way. So what I try to get across to others, find what really engages you. People would say these days what your passion is. And it doesn't matter if, and this is as you're younger, if it doesn't matter if it's not in the curriculum. If you've got something you can really engage with, that really switches you on, that you pursue with vigor and interest, do it, because that will carry over in terms of confidence and the ability to concentrate and so on into other areas. I think what we've got nowadays, earlier we had a discussion about computers. They are phenomenally helpful now, because I could have this conversation and then with my Macintosh, I could actually have it typed out. It would type it out for me, so that people who have difficulty with writing, but they're verbal and they can actually speak very fluently and they end up with terrific vocabularies and so on. Nowadays, you can actually speak to the computer, and with a bit of education of the computer, you can have a typescript. Also, the computer can take a typescript and speak it to you. So you're not dependent on writing, and you're not dependent on reading, and it can be done orally.
Yes, you're right, David. And I think in the not too distant future, there will be a situation where people will no longer have to worry about the act of reading because the computer will do it for them. The bit that, of course, is human is the bit in the middle where you think about, synthesize, analyze the information. But then the other end, when you're writing it down at the other end, that can be done by a computer as well. You're 100% right. I'm just wondering, David, what over the course of your life, what assistive technologies, if any, have you used apart from your Macintosh computer?
Actually, virtually none. But what I did do, I mean, what I discovered very early on was I needed very big writing in the printed word to be able to read aloud. So if assistive technologies, this is going a long way back. I guess being born in 1942, well before computers were widely used by individuals, I had to learn to do it myself, as it were. Now, I mean, for example, you asked me about spelling earlier. Sometimes I found Google quite helpful, but sometimes I couldn't even get the beginning spelling of a word. So I would ask my wife, or I'd ring a colleague and say, "How do you spell so-and-so?"
Right.
And they were always very, very relaxed about it, and so on. One of the things that I think is helpful is the grammar programs on computers. Now, in the early days, I would have been, I mean, I wasn't then. I had friends who actually edited my stuff for me. I also learned from colleagues how to write very succinctly, because you have co-authors and so on. You do have a grammar thing that will, and spelling, which is helpful. But by the time that came in, I'd actually learned quite a lot about grammar. and also vocabulary and things like that. And so I find myself taking huge exception to what the grammar programs think I should do, and I sort of stick to my guns. I do remember, just as an anecdote, I remember I had been sending papers to a particular journal. This is back in the 1970s. To a particular journal, and what happens when you do that is they are refereed, and the referees are other scientists, and they give you what they consider to be advice on whether it needs modification and so on. And I was getting one particular advisor who I didn't know who it was, but that didn't matter. It was meant to be done anonymously, and it would be covered in red pencil, where what was happening was he was trying to turn my way of writing, that is, my expression of the subject, into his way of doing it. And because his way of doing it also got it right, I decided he could understand what I was doing. So I said, look, can I just be frank? Can I just send you the data and you write the paper? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're doing a great job, but you do understand what I'm saying. So I'd like to stick with the way I'm saying it, thank you. And only another anecdote in terms of grasp of the English language. I submitted a paper about three or 4 years after this, towards the end of the 70s. And the referee for that one said, this sentence is a bit long, isn't it? And it was only 60 words or something like that. We completely missed the sentence shortly after that was a page and a half of the journal.
Now, David, many people with dyslexia report that they have difficulties engaging with government websites, and I wonder whether you've had any experiences and difficulties in that area.
Well, actually, I haven't, but I do understand their problem, because the websites are invariably written in very small type. They're invariably black writing on white background. And you and I both know that makes it really hard for someone with dyslexia to really focus in on the words. And they are not expressed in a way that is either succinct or clear.
Or even particularly user-friendly.
Oh, well, that's what I mean. I would agree with you, absolutely. They're not user-friendly. And I did actually suggest to a while ago that they should actually have a verbal equivalent. And they said, oh, well, we tried that and it didn't work. Well, my view of that is you didn't try hard enough.
Yes. And in fact, many progressive companies now have a function where the website speaks to you. You can just click on certain functions at the bottom and the website speaks to you, or big passages of it speak to you, and you can do things like change the font size, change the background color, and equally well change the font type, because we do know there are phenomenal differences between good and bad fonts. So thank you for that. I'm just wondering whether you have any reflections on how dyslexia is playing out for you, and you and I are both in this space, in our older years.
Yeah. Well, this is where I can reintroduce my twin brother, in the sense that I mentioned that I was the one with the literacy difficulty, that I am convinced that he, like me, had the wiring that encouraged him to think very widely. And he went into the counseling area, and also widely with spiritual elements with his wife. They had a very highly integrated and, what should I say, all-embracing way of looking at things. And that is sort of typical of the big picture type of thing.
Yes, another way that's played out, of course.
That's right. What's it like in, I would say, older age? Some people regard me as old. I'm still playing 9 holes of golf every morning. So, but yeah, okay. So it's absolutely marvelous, is what I would say. it gives me the impetus to keep on looking more widely. You mentioned the books I've written since I resigned from Massey University, because I'm still doing a little bit of scientific writing with colleagues, but not much of the other things. Now, all of those tend to be pretty big picture subjects, and it gives me an interest to think very widely, which I enjoy, to draw those that thinking together in sort of specific things that I then integrate into another area of I hope fresh thinking. Also, it has opened me up to people from all sorts of walks of life, all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of religious and cultural perceptions. Now, I was helped immensely on the way for that in 1967, when I met my first wife, who was from India, a Hindu from an ancient culture. And being from Australia, was a sort of a rather young Commonwealth country and a pragmatic scientist. It was amazing that we just clicked. Now, we had 15 years together before she died in 1982. And what engaged us was how it was we could cross these so-called barriers, cultural, religious background barriers, relatively easily. I mean, it was not absolutely easy, but relatively easily compared to the difficulties others had. And I've carried that with me for the rest of my life. Fortunately, I was lucky enough to be, I was happily lucky enough to be twice lucky in those terms, and I've been married now for a second time. My second wife, she is a veterinarian and also has very wide interests, has done a degree in counselling, and after she did that, I found I was being handled very differently.
David, I do want to change the direction slightly and acknowledge the assistance, the active assistance that you've given to me in supporting the dyslexia petition that was presented to Parliament, seems like 18 months or more ago now. And thank you for participating in the the written and oral presentations to the petitions committee, because that's slowly but surely, I think, making its way through the political process, which is, have to tell you, makes an iceberg melting look fast in many occasions. But I'm just wondering whether you would have any advice for younger people with dyslexia, advice from somebody with dyslexia, and maybe think of it in terms of what would you advise your younger self looking back now around dyslexia? Because many people with dyslexia are struggling enormously. The evidence is everywhere we look now. Dropouts from school, people getting into trouble in all sorts of different ways, people underachieving. So you have been the exception to much of that. You are the poster child, in a way, of this successful dyslexic person, and an example, as we've shown today, of so many of the features that show out in dyslexic people. But what would your advice be to younger people with dyslexia?
Well, it's okay. Part of the when you're young, you're dependent on who's around you and what their attitudes are. And what I would be doing if what I do when I come across youngsters who do have dyslexia is I really encourage, I try to find out what infuses them, what engages their interest. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be the flags of the world, or it could be something to do with horticulture, or it might be dog training on a farm, or anything, or any other area. and to really go for it, and to be ensure that their parents are encouraging them to go for it, and rather than focusing on what they can't do, what doesn't interest them, and encourage them to go with their interests. I would also say that it's imperative that we are successful. I mean, it's not just us, of course, not you, just you and me. It's imperative that we do get across the responsibility of those who are around the youngsters to not put them down, to not regard them as idiots, to actually give them support, empathetic understanding, and to apply flexibility in the process of getting them established with confidence that they can learn. And the other thing, which is very hard, I mean, I think I might have been born an optimist, and which is very helpful, but also with a significant amount of tenacity, and to encourage people to persevere, because if they do, they will get there in the end, because there will be things that do engage them, that they can do well, that will give them life satisfaction. Sometimes people with dyslexia, because of really bad experiences at school, don't flourish until they leave school. But of course, if they've had bad experiences at school, what's the stats? 50% dyslexic in jail.
But behind bars, absolutely, that's 100% true. So, David, thank you for that, because you've highlighted many of the features about the successful side of dyslexia. There was some very interesting research went on in the United States recently, where they studied the habits of people with dyslexia who were very successful, and that's very revealing picture that's portrayed, and they've captured the habits of successful dyslexic people, and you've illustrated many of those habits today in our discussions. Thank you very much. Do you have any final comments, or should we call it to a close?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. Be optimistic.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for that. And that's over and out from our very first podcast on the Between the Lines podcast series. So thank you for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Cheerio.